Welcome to the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast series to promote purpose in practice. Each week, this webinar series features an extraordinary individual that provides valuable and impactful services, helping to transform the capabilities of their nonprofit clients. Join us as we explore a variety of topics, all vital to the success of nonprofit organizations. Learn and grow from the experience and expertise of our featured guests. Without further delay, let's introduce you to the host of the Nonprofit Edge podcast series, Chris Looney.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast dedicated to promoting purpose and practice. Each episode features conversations with leaders who bring insight, experience, and practical wisdom to help nonprofit organizations and their leaders strengthen their impact and operate at a higher level. And our goal is really simple: to explore ideas, mindsets, strategies that help leaders become more effective stewards of the missions they serve. In today's conversation, we're going to focus on something many nonprofit leaders feel but rarely name. And across every sector, there is an unspoken equation: do more with less. And give more than you receive and sustain impact even when it comes at a personal cost. And over time, that equation really starts to have a dramatic effect. It creates fatigue, burnout, strain on leadership teams, and in many cases, organizations that are effective become unsustainable. And so the question we're exploring today is, does meaningful work have to come at this level of cost? And or is there a different way to define leadership and success in the nonprofit sector? And to help us understand this dynamic and reality better, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Brian Evans to the show. Brian, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
Yeah, so good to have you with us. And I'm just going to give you a brief intro, and then you can share a little bit more about your background with us. But Brian's a leadership coach and advisor who works with executives and organizations navigating complexity, growth, and transition. And his work focuses on helping leaders step outside inherited patterns and redesign how they lead, how they operate, and how they define success. So again, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you with us. And is there anything that you would add to that introduction?
Well, thank you for the introduction, Chris. And it's, extra special that with our relationship that we've had over the last couple of decades that we get to spend this time together. I'm really excited about that. And I'm really excited about sharing things that, in my estimation and in my hope, will help to create a better system and a better opportunity for us to thrive in terms of the work that we're doing out in the world in the nonprofit sector, but also the work that we're doing internally with ourselves. And you touched on it, you alighted to the fact that oftentimes there are these exchanges that are happening within the ecosystem. And we're going to talk about that today in terms of identifying them, recognizing where perhaps they came from, and also what to do about them in very specific steps so that hopefully any of the leaders who are listening today are able to take a look at a slightly different lens than the lens that they've been working with. So that's what I'm excited for about our conversation today. As far as thank you for the introduction. There was a lot of intersection of many words, but I will sum it down to the core of my work has always been, and it remains to be, centering humanity in everything that we do, because it's seemingly easy to get lost on that point in today's world. And so bringing it back to that, I think, creates the opportunity for us to create possibilities that are unimagined, but it begins and it ends with centering humanity.
Love it. Love it. And I'm going to try to internalize that. I'm getting sort of having a hard time, though, after you said 20 years.
Yeah.
Because we have known each
Well,
other
we
a long
started when
time.
we were 5, so we were in the
Of
playpen
course.
together. So
Yeah,
of
that's
course.
right. Grade school pals.
Yeah.
No. Well, to get us started, When you look across the nonprofit sector right now, what do you see happening beneath the surface of leadership and organizational performance?
Well, we're seeing a lot of really great, amazing things happening in the world. There's extraordinary growth in terms of the way that people are serving. There's an extraordinary involvement in terms of the number of people, whether it's locally, nationally, or globally, that are dedicated to taking action to make the world a better place. I started out many, many years ago. My career started in the nonprofit sector in 1989. So I'm coming up on 40 years in the sector. And what I learned early on is that every nonprofit, all of the hundreds and thousands or whatever the number is of nonprofits that exist in the world, started with at least one person deciding, I have an idea how to make the world a better place.
Right.
And I think it's important to recognize that that is the nucleus of every organization, large, small, and all points in between. Now,
Mhm.
how I go about doing that and how I enroll others to be a partner in that is what we've seen grow many times over in the X years that we observe them. So that's the beautiful thing is that the level of involvement right now seemingly is at an all-time high in terms of investing our time, our talent, our treasure in how to make the world a better place. What I'm identifying and what I'm seeing across the nonprofit sector, though, is the other side of that, which is what's the exchange? What's the cost? What is it to be so mission driven and so dedicated to mission? What are the hidden costs that we may not be necessarily identifying, but that impact not only the performance and the sustainability of an organization, but the happiness and the well-being of the people within it? Go back to what I said about centering humanity. I've always
Right.
found it interesting that in the nonprofit sector, there's so much living by the credo of doing more with less without necessarily recognizing what is the cost of that. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's exchanging our health for the mission, it's relationships that suffer, it's peace of mind. And so rather than it being an individual conversation with each leader of how to reduce their chances of burnout or depletion, I approach it from an ecosystemic view of how can we shift the leadership and success components and metrics so that we can create a thriving ecosystem rather than one in which depletion is part of the equation.
No, that's perfect. And you started answering the question that I was wanting to get to since I started thinking about this podcast episode, which is what is the hidden cost of doing good that you see most often in nonprofit leadership today?
Well, I think we have to look at it through a series of lenses, from individual to interdependent to ecosystemic. So I'll start with independent with the individual. If we take the nonprofit leader, whether it's the CEO, executive director, board chair, or the solo nonprofit operator, and they have, as I said, an idea of how to make the world a better place that they are dedicated to, they're mission driven, they're focused, they're committed, they almost are born into a belief pattern that in exchange for this impact, I'm willing to trade whatever I have to. It's so meaningful to me that I'm willing to trade whatever I have to in order to fulfill my duty to this mission. Now, I don't know. I've had obviously many, many, many for-profit clients over the years, and I've never heard them talk about the exact exchange in that way. Perhaps for their career, for my career advancement, I'm willing to make these sacrifices, but not necessarily for the ethos of the company that they're working for. I find that's a unique to the nonprofit arena is that I'm so dedicated to this organization's mission that I'm willing to make that trade. Now,
Yeah,
some of
right.
these are intentional or at least willing. Okay, I'm not going to be able to go to my child's volleyball game or baseball game because that's the only time the donor can meet. or I'm going to have an evening event, and so I'm not going to be able to be home by 6 o'clock. I'll be home by 9 o'clock. Some of these are part of the life cycle, and they're made. But there are also some hidden things that tend to show up over time that are quite frankly more serious, where we start to see with leaders breakdowns in their health, breakdowns in their personal relationships with their partners and with their children, breakdowns in their peace of mind. They're up at night worrying about some element of their work.
Yeah.
These are as tangible and perhaps even more essential than the concerns about the organization themselves or the concerns about the people within the organizations. And this occurs not only with the leaders, but then it spreads to the teams that they're working with, and it becomes sort of the identity of the organization that struggle is required, and if you're dedicated to the mission, you will willingly pay the price for the struggle.
Right.
And it is I've always found this really interesting, Chris, is that how is it that these are nonprofit organizational light bearers who are doing this work in the world and do great mission work and want the very best for others in the world. And yet within these organizations, we struggle so much to have that same well-being and caregiving for our people. That
Right.
is a dichotomy, I think, that really is under the surface that we have to address as leaders is there has to be a different way to do this, and there is a different way to do this, so that if costs are paid, they're expected, they're recognized, they're respected, and they're consciously made, not just generally assumed that this is a cost that you're going to make because you're a mission-driven individual.
Very
And a
good.
lot of those, I think, I'm going to use the word dysfunction frequently today. And dysfunction carries a lot of judgment to it. And I'm going to dispel the judgment to it. All dysfunction means is not functioning or not functioning well. A lot of our individuals, leaders, operations staff, board members, interpret these costs and breakdowns as individual failures. I'm here to highlight that these are not always individual resilience factors. These are structural dysfunctions. And
Okay.
dysfunctions cannot be outworked, they cannot be out strategized, and they can't be outspent. They have to be faced directly. And that's the invitation for today's nonprofit leaders is it's time to take a look at these dysfunctions, question them, create different ways of being for ourselves and for our people so that we can create sustainability and thriving rather than just survivability.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like what you just said. I think that that is a core point that you can't outwork dysfunction, right? So I'm going to remember that one for the future. When we talk about more with less, right? That's a common refrain in nonprofit management.
Mhm.
Um, where does that mindset come from? How does it get embedded in the organization over time?
Wow, that is an excellent question that could go into such a rabbit hole because some of it has to do with human psychology, evolutionary psychology, but we won't go
Fair,
down that rabbit
fair,
hole.
fair, fair. Yeah,
I
yeah.
think the keys that I would offer to your question is um, we've inherited a industry that perhaps began as a asking industry. It was very much even the terms charitable giving is is some have some, we have less. Will you give us more? And I think the mindset rooted in less needing from those who have more created a fairly strong DNA type that we've worked with to refine some, but is still at the heart of a lot of the work that nonprofits do. I think that it comes out in ways that are both subtle and overt. The ways that the organizations, some of it is, it's built into the contracts. Oh, you can only have, X 3% go to fundraising expenses and 10% for administrative expenses. Otherwise, you're out of compliance with the contract. And name a for-profit company where that sort of overlay is there. So even the structures themselves can create and reinforce a limitation of an idea that the only way you can operate is under these rules and guidelines, and these rules and guidelines are prove to us that you can will do good with the money that we give you over and above what you're actually capable of doing given the reality of logistics of running an organization. So that leads to okay, well then we only have less and we have to do more with less. But I think
Hmm.
that there's some shifts that can occur within that. Some of it is a reality. Some of it is perceived reality.
Okay.
Are you familiar with Lynn Twist's book, The Soul of Money?
No.
Okay. Lynn Twist is, and the reason I bring this up for our listeners is Lynn Twist was an extraordinary fundraiser on global scale. She worked with the Hunger Project as one of their high end fundraisers, traveling and fundraising internationally. So she speaks the language that we speak. That's the reason
Yep.
I identified with her. It's not just a business person saying this is how you do it. This is
That's
someone who
right.
knows the struggles that we deal with. She identifies three toxic money myths that I think are important to highlight here because they're part of the answer to the question that you pose of what is more with less. She identifies three myths. One myth is there's not enough to go around. The second myth is more is better. And the third myth is that's just the way that it is, and it always has been, and it always will be.
Love it. Right.
And I think that we see this and we've inherited this in our DNA of there's always going to be scarcity.
Yeah.
There's always going to be, we need to be keep doing more. That's the second one. More is better. And the third one, if that's always the way that it is a level of resignation. And, my background is in psychology, my PhD, my master's degree. And so I always think about it through the lens of, well, what is the psychology teaching us about this? And the psychology is scarcity. The psychology is this chasing, always chasing more, a never sort of endingness, and a resignation that nothing can change. And I think these are the three things that have affected more leaders within the nonprofit sector as inherited beliefs that tunes and attunes how they do the work that they do, how they lead, how they govern, how they create their culture. And I think that that probably answers the question of why, less is more. Some, like I said, some of it is reality, but also some of it is perception of reality.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's
Well,
where the
I love
change I think has to occur.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, and I want to explore that particular topic with you more on another podcast or in a session with Fulcrum members
Of
because
course.
it's so powerful. Let's move to the next kind of segment, if you will, of
Mhm.
leadership at a breaking point. And I wanted to find out from you why you think even high performing nonprofit organizations often feel unsustainable internally.
Well, I think we tend to have a fairly narrow view of what high performance is as
Okay.
nonprofits
Okay.
and as nonprofit leaders, board members, even operations staff members is did we hit our program marks? What is our impact? How do we count our impact? Did we meet our budget? Are we engaging our donors? So donor count, donor giving, all of those things. And all of those are very important. So please hear me. I'm not discounting those. But I find that those KPI tend to be the KPIs that get discussed, but what leads us to some of the issues of whether that performance is true from the outside all the way to the core, or if it's just true on the outside, is whether we're also attending to some of the other critical factors that are important to leadership and to the team. So I'll simplify that by saying this. If we've killed all of our people in order to reach our numbers and tell this really great story in the annual report, we haven't really been of service.
Mhm. Sure.
And I propose, and I have seen it proven that there are ways to both create the real and true performance while also creating well-being, vitality, and sustainability within the organization. Remember what I said, centering humanity, scaling all scaling is human scaling. If we're going to scale up, it's going to have to be with the humans that we work within our ecosystem first. That is going to lead to the performance, not performance at all costs, even burning down. And whether it's intentionally or whether it's knowingly or unknowingly, not I don't think anybody in nonprofit would intentionally, you know, cause harm to anyone else. But knowingly or unknowingly, if we're causing harm to ourselves and our people while we're performing, that's not really a high performing organization.
Right, right. That's good. That's good. And what about the CEOs and leadership teams themselves? Like, what are they carrying that others may not see?
I think they're carrying a lot, and I've frequently felt this way, and I think it's only intensified in the last, let's say, decade. Certainly, none of us expected the pandemic to occur in the way that it did, and the
Right.
pandemic was one of the more obvious. This is going to be Captain Obvious. One of the most disruptive experiences, particularly for nonprofits, because of some of the things we've talked about. Their infrastructure was not such, was built such to very quickly pivot. On the other hand, they tended to be smaller teams, so they were able to quickly pivot. But how to lead in a nonprofit sector is fundamentally different now than it was, say, in 2018, 2019. And yet the leaders are still trying to figure out how to do this. And so I think for the leaders, the leadership teams, the CEOs, the board and leadership communication, the expectations of still hitting the same marks as they were a decade ago, but the way to go about meeting the marks are vastly different, dramatically different than they were even 5 or 6 years ago. I think the elements of balance and mental emotional health are a issue that have come to the fore that leaders are expected to navigate perhaps without knowing how to navigate it for
Mhm.
themselves and their teams. So there was the well-worn path. We're on a new path. It's not well-worn, but there are ways to evolve with the evolving tide. Now, you and I have been through a lot of changes in the industry in the last few years. We'll just call it few years. But we went through, the Great Recession. We went through some of the political shifting winds. We've gone through economic ups and downs. We've gone through a pandemic now, and we've gone through whatever is emerging right here and right now on the other side of it. So what we recognize is there is no real seemingly different than any time in the past, there is no set point for leaders to say, this is the way I lead. It is now a nearly continuous evolution of how do I lead in this moment. And that I think is where we come back to saying, okay, there's a deeper calling to lead than just leading for performance now. There's leading for
Okay.
well-being. There's leading for thriving, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes, what that is, what that means. That doesn't ignore the realities, the financial realities, the systemic and logistical realities of the work that we do, but it also complements them with other elements so that we can enhance the way that we're doing well and doing good at the same time.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, let's kind of jump into the nonprofit identity pattern.
Hmm.
And I know you've talked about patterns and inherited beliefs frequently, so I wanted to go a little bit deeper there,
Sure.
and kind of start with a broad question, which is, what is the nonprofit identity pattern, and how does it shape leadership behavior?
Well, it goes back to what I was saying about the inherited attributes and beliefs that have become part of the DNA, the DNA of the nonprofit sector, from their origins of charitable giving to where you and I have talked many times about shifting the narratives to mission partnership, shifting the narratives to personal investment in the impact that donors, leaders, and others who are giving time, talent, and treasure want to create in the world. And still, some of the patterning plays its way out in the ways that nonprofit organizations view themselves and therefore act. So I'll give you an example, which I'm sure you see frequently and I've seen frequently, the organizations that resist coming up with creative ideas of how to talk about and deliver on their mission because it feels too corporate. It feels like there's a fear I'm going to lose my mission. I have to choose between mission and growth. And in some cases, it's mission and, sustainability. And so it creates or perpetuates a belief pattern that just has the meaning enough, just surviving. Even though there's such a strong dedication to the mission, the obstacles that the organizations put in their way were pre-programmed based on this belief that that's something that nonprofit or that's something that for-profit companies do. That's not something that we do. There's elements of it that are the poor is pure element, or the we're not as capable, we don't have the same resources, we don't have the same focus that for-profit companies have, and then sort of resting back in that and saying, okay, so what do we do with our little nonprofit self? I used to refer to it as it's the little brother syndrome. They would look and go, okay, that's the big brother, and we're the little brother, and so we're going to always be the little brother. That is a made up belief that perpetuates most nonprofits that, including really capable leaders. So please hear me, leaders.
Right.
This is not
Right.
a judgment of you, your capability, your intelligence, your ideas. This is part of the ecosystemic DNA that was inherited. That's the nonprofit identity patterns, are the inherited beliefs that interfuse. And so, what do we do about it? What typically leaders do is they focus on their fixative mind. So I'll explain a concept here. There's a dual parts of our intelligence, our fixative mind and our creative mind. Fixative mind, just what it sounds like. It's designed to solve problems. Creative mind is designed to create all new possibilities, envision possibilities, come up with all new ideas. It's the part of us when we were kids that just daydreamed. We just had our imagination run wild and we're like, I'm going to create a flying car. In those moments, absolute 100% chance I'm going to create a flying car. The difficulty for most of us psychologically in life and within organizations is that we have shifted to life as a problem to be solved mindset. And so we use our fixative mind in cases where a creative mind would actually bring us way more possibilities. Fixative mind's important. If you lose your keys, you want to go through the process of elimination to find your keys. Great use of fixative mind. We want to create a greater impact using the resources that we have and enroll people to be part of a global movement to make the world a better place. Not a great use of fixative mind. Way better to use your creative mind. But most of us in nonprofit organizations spend 80, 90% of our time focusing on what problem do we have to fix? Do we have enough money? Do we have the systems in place? Do we have the people in place? Do we have to, what do we have to do to make this little bit work to have maximum impact? Instead of how can we create a culture and practices and possibility that solve these problems and create so much more opportunities. That I think is one of the biggest shifts that as the nonprofit sector breaks out of its programming and recognizes there's something called meta possible that we can step into that can create way more impact than we could possibly imagine in this moment, then you won't face the same sort of depletion that comes with just problem solving, problem solving, problem solving, problem solving. Who loves to solve problems? Nobody, but continuously. But who loves to imagine possibilities and gets energized by it? All of us. But we spend very little time, we invest very little time in that sector. We spend more on just being in our fixative mode. So I think those are some of the kind of key limitations that we've inherited. They're not deal killers and they're not destined to be the future, but it does require energy and effort to shift that lens and do things in a different way.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I love it. That's so great. And are these sort of dynamics or patterns showing up with other leaders in the organization, like board members, or it can't just be the CEOs, right? Or
No.
who are these people, and what are their beliefs, and how do they show up?
No, it shows up in all factors. If you think of a nonprofit like for some reason, like a soap opera or like a play, everyone has a role that they're playing. And different roles have different perspectives. They have different responsibilities to the wholeness of the drama, if you will. Um, and the role is influenced by the belief systems that have been passed down. So the leader, CEO, ED has this role. The board has this role. The operations staff have this role. The donors have this role. The community has this role. And these are inherited, warts and all.
Hmm.
Some of them work more seamlessly than others. Some of them are exceedingly detrimental to the potential impact that the organizations can make or the leaders themselves can make. But I think so I think what it invites, I'll skip to the end of the book in this sense, that what it invites is an opportunity to have conversations not about the problem solving aspect of roles, but rather the collaborative aspects of emergence, what's emerging, what possibilities are emerging. And if we focus on the possibilities, then the roles support the possibilities versus the possibilities being limited or being influenced by what roles are coming in. So it becomes a vision centered, outward concentric with all of these stakeholders involved versus all of the stakeholders determining what the vision and the center is. I think that's a
Hmm.
huge shift for a lot of organizations, and I'm talking, like I said, everyone from the single nonprofit with a group of friends on their board, all the way up to multinational organizations. These are conversations that if the leaders have the courage to have these conversations, it can transform what is possible for them in terms of impact because it transforms what's possible with the humans who are creating the impact.
I love it. Yeah, that's so good. And this provides a perfect segue for us into a shift from diagnosing challenges to exploring what's possible.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about possibilities. And for you, what does it mean to sort of redesign leadership in the nonprofit sector?
Well, I think it's a two-part equation, at least a two-part equation. Um, you're redefining and you're also redefining success at the same time.
Okay.
Because as I've mentioned, I think one of the challenges that is inherited in nonprofits and for profits to a degree, they have their own challenges. That's another podcast. But it is that there's only two real measurements of success. It's did we meet our marks, and are we having impact in the nonprofit world? Less frequently, we're asking, how did we meet our marks if we did? And what was the cost or the exchange of it? So I believe that it starts with three shifts, but the first one is rooted in awareness, a courage and an awareness to find out, wait a minute, how are we doing what we're doing? Not why are we doing what we're doing. We're clear on our mission. Not how well are we doing what we're doing. We have our KPIs on that, but how are we doing it? Are we meeting our marks? And that is a evolution of the measurement that I feel is responsible for how we can create sustainable growth and also thriving. So, what do I mean by that? As I mentioned earlier, if we're burning all of our people down to ash to hit our marks, and that is a no, purely from an operational standpoint, that's not sustainable. But from a human standpoint, it's rather irresponsible. Again, not because they're bad people. Some of this is the inherited,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
all of that. But I think the reason I used courageous leadership, and remember the in the etymology of the word courageous is the word coeur, which is French for heart. And so when I say courageous leadership, it is leadership that is willing to step into their heart in this conversation and say, in today's staff meeting, we're going to have a very different conversation than we frequently have. We are going to talk about the things that are perhaps hidden costs that I'm paying and perhaps you are paying. And we're going to have a conversation about what we need to do to shift this as individual and collective leadership within the mission that we serve. That's a
Mm. Yeah.
courageous action. And it is an invitation to lay out plain. Here's what I now see that I didn't see before that's going to help us to not only do good in the world, but do well by each and every one of you. So I think the first is the leader's ability and willingness to have that courage to have a courageous conversation and a visible and vulnerable conversation.
I love that concept of courage and the connection to heart. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. I think it's worth digging a little bit deeper into that connection between people's understanding of courage and the heart or humanity behind it, as you've mentioned earlier. Um, how can leaders really move beyond that trade-off model of success that we've talked about? I mean, is this courage part of it? How would you explain it?
Well, I think there's some very specific steps. It depends on the consciousness and the willingness of each leader. First of all, we'll just say that to get that out. And this is the case in all areas of business around the globe. Some really are just focused on outcome and without concern about the expense. We're not talking about those leaders. We're talking about the leaders who are leading into their best capability. They're intelligent, they're articulate, they have good strategy, they have all of the qualities.
Self-reflective.
Self-reflective would be a serious plus. Self-reflective is a requirement for this next piece of it, though,
Thank you.
of recognizing that while this works on one level, there are multiple levels that I have a responsibility for leading this organization or these individuals. Leadership is one of those, unfortunately, narrowly defined or ambiguously defined words that everyone seeks, everyone has a degree of, but no one can quite agree on what it means because it changes by context, it changes by interaction, it changes moment to moment. So I would say, okay, is the leader aware? Is the leader dedicated to a positive outcome? Is the leader capable of creating connections within groups of individuals to leverage that outcome? Is the leader strategic in terms of taking things from a inspiring vision into action, inspiration, so that it's not just an inspired vision, there's actually action steps to make it create or manifest in the world. And then I start to add in my stuff on it, which is can they honor the people who they can they center humanity and honor the people who are also dedicated to creating that positive difference in the world. If that's true, if those conditions are true, then there's a couple of steps that they can take. The first step is what I refer to as organizational vitality. Okay, if there is an exchange that's happening due to either inherited or just, breakdowns that happen, what are they? What are they? But if vitality is our lifeblood, we have a certain amount of vitality that we can give to our mission. Where are we creating it? Where are we depleting it? Where are we transferring it? And where can it be restored? Now, I'll share those again. Where are we creating it? Where are we depleting it? Is it being transferred? And where is it being restored? So if we sit and we look and say, okay, we have this sum of vitality that's in this room dedicated to this mission. Where is the most creative ways that we can use it to engage possibilities? We're now looking at creative mind. Where is it being leaked? Where is it being depleted? We're spending a lot of time on XYZ. Call out the exchange, call out the costs. Where is it being transferred? You, me, every one of us have interacted with some organization where leadership decides something and operations pays the cost for it. That is a leadership opportunity for us to create a collaborative where we all contribute to the outcome without it becoming the yoke that a lot of the operation staff are bearing. And then finally, where's vitality being restored? How do we create an environment that is energy giving instead of energy depleting? It's an important conversation that rarely happens without facilitation and without because there's always, yeah, but we have these KPIs that we have to talk about in this 60-minute staff meeting. So the exchanges are happening, and it's important to recognize, going back to what I said about the human cost to it, the operations cost, who's paying the cost of these?
Mhm.
Is the leader sleeping soundly while the manager or the department head is up at night concerned about it? Have we been asked? What I mean, you and I have heard the saying, "Oh, well, what keeps you up at night?" It's like, well, the simple fact that there is something that's keeping you up at night is problematic. That has a performance impact. So performance isn't just the model of how it's reported out. Performance is what are all of the exchanges along the way. And so that's the second step is getting to know what are we exchanging? What is the map of the exchange? Because when we know that, now we can make shifts in the process so that we can address those. And then I
Mhm.
think the third thing, this is philosophical, but this is perhaps the most important thing that you and I have discussed today, Chris, is it's not the goal of having and leading an organization is not just survival. It is thriving,
Okay.
thriving. My PhD is in positive psychology. Positive psychology is the study and practice of individual, collective, and community thriving. That's what it is how do we create a thriving environment for everybody involved? The leader, the teams, the board, the community, the donors. This is all for, with that, this is not a soft metric. It's not something to that when we get around to it. Thriving is absolutely essential for mission success. So if you want to have the most successful mission, build us a thriving organization. But that starts with all of the individual stakeholders in it thriving, not just one or two pieces of it thriving. So I think those are the three things that we really the leaders have to focus on in order to shift the tide here.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think we've kind of determined or landed that thriving is the optimal state,
Mhm.
right? And I can't imagine an organizational leader wouldn't want to um, experience that sense of thriving, not only for themselves, but for their stakeholders, for their community, for their family of uh, colleagues and donors and investors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so
Sure.
if we accept that, now there's work that
Mhm.
is required to achieve a thriving state. Not everybody is willing to make that investment, even if they know what the steps are. But if there is a leader willing to make that investment, what are your recommendations for them to consider in order to move toward that thriving state? What if there's willingness
Mhm.
and there's an acknowledgement that there's something better, and I as a leader want to achieve it? Where do they go from where they are today? What would you recommend they do?
Well, I think there's kind of three simple steps. Obviously, simple doesn't mean easy, but I think that there are three simple steps. The first is, and you mentioned it, is beginning to identify and name that there is an exchange, or that there are exchanges that are taking place. Um, why it's happening, who's facilitating it, what part of DNA is less important. It's important for our conversations to know the genesis of it, but essentially it's to recognize with themselves and with their teams that there are exchanges currently being paid, and how, if any way, can we work with them so that the exchanges are sustainable without it being depleting. The second thing I think is to redefine, or rather enhance, the definition of what success is, and recognize that success is more than just performance. Success is also having the degree of vitality and thriving in the organizations, with everyone within the organizations as a rhythm. Not every day will everyone feel like they're thriving, but overall, the intentional culture build is to have everyone feel like they're thriving, rather than fewer. And then I think the third thing is just to start small. And we're not going to redesign everything overnight. It starts with one, as I mentioned, one staff meeting, or one board conversation, or one dedication that a leader says, this is how I'm going to do this differently, or this is how we're going to integrate sustainability as a success metric in terms of what we do. The Kingdom of Bhutan, they measure their gross domestic product by the happiness and fulfillment of their citizenship. So this is an entire country dedicated to where this thriving is the way that they measure how they proceed. Now,
Mhm.
I'm not saying that that will be your annual report, but it does need to be, I think, part of the internal report, for example, at a board retreat, to say, we've talked to our staff, and these are the areas in which they're thriving, and these are the areas in which they're challenged, and we want to create a ecosystem where both conversations are happening simultaneously, so that we can address them simultaneously. So I think what ultimately the goal is to make visible and bring to the fore things that have been normalized under the surface that may have, in many cases, provided a cost that was payable that may not have to be payable in quite the same ways.
I love it. That's so great. All right, so one final reflection question for you. If someone listening today is feeling the weight of leadership, but senses there may be a different way, what would you want them to remember?
You can redesign how you lead, given what we've talked about here. It requires courage, it requires vulnerability, but is a different way that you can lead that will not only create greater, equal or greater performance outcomes, but also will create greater well-being for you and your people. There are ways to measure success that are more comprehensive than just the KPIs, perhaps that we've been measuring. And the well-being of your people is as important or more important than those KPIs. And then the third thing is, I think if we begin to accept that we're not limited to simply survival, that thriving is not only possible, but with the right set of tools becomes inevitable, then we're more able to focus on what impact we can create in the world rather than simply problem solving to survive. And if we begin, even if we don't know exactly how to do that or what that's going to look like, but begin with those three shifts, then all new ideas will come, all new conversations will happen, and then we'll actually see that there is the progression of doing good and doing well at the same time.
Wow. Yes. Brian, that's so great. This has really been an extraordinarily helpful conversation. What you've helped articulate is something that many leaders are experiencing but haven't had the language to describe, I believe. The idea that the cost of doing good has been sort of normalized and that leadership has quietly become defined by trade-offs between impact and sustainability, between mission and personal well-being is so relevant. But also the opportunity that leadership can be redesigned, as you said, that success can be redefined, and that it's possible to build organizations that are both high performing and sustainable over time. So thank you for sharing your perspective and for challenging us all to think more intentionally about how we lead and how we operate. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for this episode of the Nonprofit Edge. If this conversation resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on your own leadership model. Where might you be operating inside assumptions that are no longer serving you, your team, or your mission? And what would it look like to lead in a way that creates both impact and sustainability? And if you found today's conversation valuable, I would invite you to like and subscribe, share it with a colleague. And as always, thank you for the work you all do and the missions you all serve. Brian, thank you once again for your
Thank you,
leadership in
Chris.
this space. You bet. And until next time, continue to lead for good. See you all very soon, everybody.
Thank you for joining us for the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast series to promote purpose in practice. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation and learned some important lessons from our featured expert. We always want our content to be informative and to position nonprofit leaders to succeed. Please join us again for our next podcast. In the meantime, we wish you all the best and encourage you to learn more about Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership by visiting our website at www.fulcrumleader.com.